Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I am Amanda, an amateur writer and literature enthusiast, and this is my series, which I call Micro Appreciation, where we dig into the nitty-gritty of literature, and it will live up to that description. You'll see. This is my first video, one of three, I expect, on The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan, which is the first book in the Wheel of Time series. This video will be a little bit different from my other micro appreciation videos. There are only 3 of them, so it's not a big deal, really. Big deal for me because writing the script has taken so much time. Because rather than in my other videos, in my videos on the 2 Dune books, which I micro appreciated, I structured it in first I went through a summary of each chapter and then went down quotes from that chapter which I liked or had comments about. And here I'm trying to do a more integrated style, both because I think I noticed that there happens more things in these chapters, so it would be a sort kind of jerky to go back and forth to do one thing and then the other. That might be one of the reasons why this script is a lot longer than my script on Dune. And it's not about book length, because the first Dune book is a brick, such as all of these books are bricks as well. So it will take time. I didn't anticipate how much, but I might be getting ahead of myself. So this project will probably continue to be very time consuming, and I'm not complaining yet. That's just stating a fact. So I'm to anticipate a lot of content, I hope. I do hope that doing the next book in the series will be a lot smoother, because I had a long period here when I took a break from YouTube because of, other issues. And I hope to keep working on it from now on. This is me manifesting my hopes and wishes. So we'll see how it actually works out. You never know. As a little background, this first book of 14, I believe, was first published in 1990, and it was a lot of people's first introduction to fantasy. Robert Jordan famously passed away before he had a chance to finish it, and Brandon Sanderson picked up the task and continued after him with Jordan's approval, and reportedly doing a very good job. So I'm looking forward to see that and maybe compare styles and whatnot when I get that far. It's 14 books. It's gonna take a while, but we're patient people, aren't we? It is my first time reading these, but I have heard a lot about them because I've known a lot of people who have read them and enjoyed them very much. So I have heard a lot of good things and some questionable things as well. But I know what I'm in for, a little bit at least. But I haven't heard too many of the details. So that's good. It will be fairly fresh. I saw the first season of the adaptation of the books a couple of years ago, and I wasn't enthralled with it. Far from it. I hardly remembered anything, and that says a lot in itself, doesn't it? About halfway through this first book, I rewatched a few of the episodes, so I do understand why a lot of the fans are disappointed. It seems to me that the showrunners didn't want to do a callow youth storyline, which is fair enough, I guess. But it does make it sort of strange that they chose source material which has such a strong callow youth theme running throughout. The story is about 4 youngsters being exposed to the wider world for the first time, whilst in the series they are all mature adults with some forced drama going on with them. I also thought that it was a really strange choice of the showrunners to force some uncertainty about who of them is the Dragon Reborn. In the books, Rand is the clear protagonist, so there was never any real doubt in the book. If Jordan wanted there to be doubt, I don't think he carried it off very well, but I have a feeling, I sort of remember hearing that was never his intent. And not only have I always known that it's Rand who's the Dragon Reborn, The name of the series, translated into Swedish, isn't Tidens jul. It is Sagan om drakens återkomst, which literally means the tale of the dragon's return, which sort of didn't leave a lot to the imagination in that department. And I mean, it's totally fine that it's obvious, so that's why I'm confused why they made it a mystery. And then I think it was they revealed in the first episode that one of them is the dragon reborn. Well, Moraine never floats this as a theory in the books. It's the very last line of the book it's stated, but not before. So it's a very interesting, lots of interesting choices they made. Anyway, as soon as I started reading, I realized that I had a subconscious expectation. That is, that I had low expectations on the actual writing. Because whenever someone told me about it, it was always about the story or the characters. So I sort of subconsciously assumed that the writing would be the worst part, like the structure and the style. And I realized this bias as soon as I started reading because I was pleasantly surprised. It's actually really lovely and the craftsmanship is obvious throughout. So, long videos ahead. And as a small disclaimer, I did read the glossary in the book last, not strangely, because it's last. So I might mispronounce some of the words. I have tried to relearn the things I got wrong, but I might slip. And the spellings of things is rarely obvious, at least to me. Like Egwene is not spelled like that, in my mind. And even more so like Nynaeve. But that's also fine, I guess. I do apologize if my pronunciations vary as we progress. And I'm not thrilled that there is a pronunciation key. It comes across as way too micromanagerial for me. Well, at least my experience as a writer, I do have a constant struggle with wanting to control the reader experience, and while still knowing that giving too many details can really rub the reader the wrong way. And when I think about it, how a reader sounds out a name in their mind while they're reading doesn't really change that much. And I think it's just slightly annoyed to be corrected, in particular if you see it after you finish the book, like I did. And you have to relearn a bunch of things like I had to do. Or I think it's even worse if Jordan expected the reader to check the glossary every time a new person or place name appeared to check the pronunciation key so you got it right from the beginning. Because that would surely interrupt the flow of the reading experience horribly. But on the other hand, I was sort of angry when I read Lord of the Rings because of the constant interruption with asterisks. I hated it. It was really annoying for me. So I would never, sit and check whilst reading. But I do understand that is probably a me problem. I had a lot of opinions while reading and more thoughts than opinions. And I do realize that it might be touchy to hear contrary opinions to your own about something that you loved when you were young. I have extreme such feelings about the Empire trilogy by Raymond E. Feast and Jenny Wurst. I have them here behind me in Pride of Place because they had such a profound effect on me. I read them over and over as a teenager, and I'm always eager to recommend them to anyone. I have, however, not read them since at the latest my early 20s because I'm aware that my standards are higher now. My English is advanced enough that I might be able to spot usages that I don't agree with, and I have even more opinions about story crafting and world building and characterization. And it's unlikely that my admiration for these books would be significantly lowered, but I don't want to take the risk. They are close to perfect in my mind, and I choose not to fiddle with those emotions. So I absolutely respect if you... As the same thing, it's sort of similar to my feelings about The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. Whenever someone asks me what the best book I've read is, it's The Book Thief. And I've only read it once because I don't want to affect my emotional experience reading it, because it was very impactful. It's fantastic. You should all read it. And I don't want to examine it in detail like I do with literature now. I absolutely respect if you want to get into the comment and defend this book that you love, if that was your experience. And I want to say that all of this is my opinions. Opinions are subjective. Some people think that having an opinion makes it unassailable, and I don't agree with that. You can always challenge someone else's opinion with your own. If you have support for your own opinion, then it's a valid challenge, of course. So this is all my opinion, and I'll do my best to illustrate why I have these opinions, why I have reached the conclusions that I have, or why the questions that I have come from. And do please inform me if I have simply not got the point. But please keep spoilers to a minimum, because I want to keep my experience fresh as I continue down the series. And I have made no research on this story, except for Google searches on 2 words that weren't in the dictionary, because Jordan made them up, so that made sense. But I will say that the fastest way to quote-unquote lose a debate on media analysis is to rely too heavily on your feelings. Personally, I stop engaging with people whose main point boil down to, I like this, therefore it's good, or the more obnoxious version, I don't like that, therefore it's bad. Your feelings about a work is relevant and valid, but if you can't explain or find a reason for why you're having your feelings or experiences, then it doesn't really have a place in a debate on the quality of something. And sober examination can lead to great things, but as I've said, I choose not to do it in certain cases. So with that little disclaimer, let's get started. Excellent. So the book begins with a pre-prologue of a kind, which seems to have been added in the 2002 edition. And I think it's fantastic. It's a summertime idyll, which gives a sharp contrast to the winter mystery of the rest of the book. This, it shows us what it's supposed to be like in the 2 rivers, where the story starts. The wonderful summer day is only slightly marred by the presence of a large number of ravens. It's also very nice that it's from Egwene's point of view when she's only 9 years old, and it does give insight into her character as she is in the main story, particularly her wish to become an adult as quickly as possible and her desire to see the world. It also gives us a lot of world-building clues, which sets us up wonderfully for the later chapters to build upon. We also get 2 pieces of information about Nynaeve, which become important later on. It's the day of the year when most of the 2 river folk, which are the inhabitants of a few isolated villages nestled between 2 rivers, gather to pool efforts in shearing their sheep, which is done every year because wool is one of their major exports. And during this day, the men shear the sheep, the women cook, young men hustle the sheep, and young women sort the wool, whilst children over 8 carry water to the workers. This year including Egwene. Some of the girls and boys filling buckets laughed and used their wooden dippers to fling water at one another, but Egwene settled for enjoying the stir of the current on her bare legs, and her toes wriggling on the sandy bottom as she climbed back out. She was not here to play. At 9, she was carrying water for the first time, but she was going to be the best water carrier ever. And this is Egwene. She's motivated and driven to be the best that she can be, in a hurry to become a responsible adult. She questions tradition for tradition's sake, and she hates when her sister calls her small. And she has high expectations on those who are given authority. And she's disappointed when they don't live up to it, be they adults or older children. 2 years older than she, he carried himself very straight, stretching to seem taller than he was. This was his last year carrying water at the shearing, and he behaved as if that cloaked him with some sort of authority. Nice use of cloaked. With a quick nod, as if he had solved the problem, he hurried off, making a great show of holding his bucket with one hand, well away from his side. The hierarchies between children are so elaborate, aren't they? But Egwene knows better than to respect someone only because they're older than she is. She did have work to do, and she was going to be the best water carrier ever. If she was good enough at carrying water, maybe they would let her help with the food or the wool next year, instead of 2 years later. If she did the best job ever, no one would ever be able to call her a baby again. And it's super endearing, the elaborate plans she makes. Ahead of her, Kenley was slouching along beside the table, no longer trying for every inch of height. Nice description of boys being boys. Thieving boys in this case. Before Kenley could take a second step, Mistress Island descended on him like a stooping falcon, seizing his ear with one hand and the honey cake with the other. It's a very nice likeness. A slim woman, with a thick grey braid that hung below her hips, Corin Island baked the best sweets in Eamon's Field. Except for Mother, Egwene added loyally. Very sweet loyalty on Egwene's behalf. But I do wonder if Mother shouldn't be capitalized here. What do you think? Besides being the best water carrier, we learn that Egwene's second mission of the day is to lay eyes on Brand, on whom she has a crush. It's deep enough crush, that she denies even to herself that she wants to see him, instead keeping an eye out for Matrim Cthulhu and Perrin Ibarra, his best friends. Because of this, we see Perrin with his family, as his parents arrange for him to be apprenticed to the village blacksmith. Jocelyn Ibarra was a pretty woman, and when she smiled, it seemed the sun might hide its head in defeat. Very nice. Egwene has firm ideas on how girls should and shouldn't act when they have a crush on someone. To her, it's bad to be, in her words, a woolhead, mooning over a boy as she sees a girl do over Perrin. Egwene shook her head. Maybe Cilia was an innie, but he ought to at least notice. Which is completely fair, I think. The least you can do when someone has a crush on you is to see it. Egwene also comes across the village wisdom, which is a role in the village for a wise woman, I guess. With her is the wisdom's apprentice, Nynaeve, who we learn is very young for the position she is about to take over. Nynaeve began fiddling with her braid, tugging at it the way she did when she was nervous, or trying to bring attention to the fact that she was a grown woman now. Being allowed to braid your head is a rite of passage for Two Rivers women, signaling entering adulthood. And this happens when the women's circle deems that you are ready. Being late to this is obviously an embarrassment, and Egwene wants to be the youngest one ever allowed. Eventually, Egwene finds Rand with a group of other boys taking a breather, and she listens in on their conversation. We learn very smoothly that Matt is a troublemaker, one of two in the group. Dav was taller than Matt and stockier, but his eyes had that same light. His clothes were always rumpled from something he should not have been doing. Listen, I just got a great idea. The boys are then summoned by Egwene's father, the mayor of the village, Eamon's Field, who is working, shearing sheep with a group of men. Egwene follows to see what happens. The boys request a story with the most fantastical elements, giving us a lot of those world-building details. They request Aes Sedai warders, Trollocs, and a false dragon. Instead, Rand's father obliges by telling about the real dragon. We learn also that it's seen by some as inappropriate to speak of such things, which partially explains why Egwene doesn't know the story and is confused by some details. The story takes place in the Age of Legends, millennia ago, which sounds to me like it was a magic-powered post-scarcity society, until it was all ruined by a war brought by the Dark One. The Dark One is our main antagonist, and you dare not even speak his true name. I will say that at one point of my reading, I drew a likeness between the Dark One and Rumpelstiltskin off of Once Upon a Time, and the giggling gesture he does. And he took the edge right off the ominous aura. And that's not an insult. Rumpelstiltskin is a great antagonist as well. Anyway, the all-consuming war was called the War of Shadows, where not only monsters like Trollocs and Myrddraal fought for the dark, but among them Darkfens, who are human collaborators. Some of these were Aes Sedai, and became the Forsaken. Egwene is confused by this because everyone knows that some of the Forsaken are men, and men can't be Aes Sedai. Wait, the Forsaken had been Aes Sedai? She hoped Master Althor did not say that too freely, or the women's circle would come calling on him. Anyway, some of the Forsaken were men, so he had to be wrong. Which very smoothly tells us that all Aes Sedai are women now. Anyway, the Shadow was winning the war until a man called Lews Therin Telemann came along, the dragon, which is confusing because apparently some believe that the dragon destroyed the world. Not in this story. Here, his 100 companions and his army fought their way to Shaiul Ghul and managed to reseal the Dark One and the Forsaken in the prison made for the Dark One by the Creator at the moment of creation. The Creator seems to be a very absent divinity in this world. Reciting that the Dark One and the Forsaken are sealed away is a common affirmation, telling us that he's still a real fear for the people of this continent. The story is over before we learned how the dragon destroyed the world after saving it, and the boys are sent back to their work. As I said, it's a nice little prologue. I once had a talk with someone about prologues, and they told me that someone had told them that if your story has a prologue, you're starting the story at the wrong place. Which is kind of fair enough, but I do like them, and this story has 2 as of 2002. Prologue, Dragonmount. The original prologue is a glimpse into the fall of Lews Therin Telemann. He is wandering through a wrecked palace littered with bodies, seemingly unaware of the devastation, looking for his wife. The palace still shook occasionally as the earth rumbled in memory, groaned as if it would deny what had happened. Bars of sunlight cast through rents in the walls made motes of dust glitter where they yet hung in the air. Jordan is generally fantastic in the beginning and ending of his chapters, painting very vivid pictures. Scorch marks marred the walls, the floors, the ceilings. Broad black smears crossed the blistered paints and gilt of once bright murals, soot overlaying crumbling friezes of men and animals, which seemed to have attempted to walk before the madness grew quiet. In odd counterpoint, colorful tapestries and paintings, masterworks all, hung undisturbed except where bulging walls had pushed them awry. Nice use of counterpoint and generally excellent description of the ruination. A man arrives at the site, frustrated by Lews Therin's confused state. We learn that this person is Ellen Morin Tedrenai, betrayer of hope, and he says this interesting thing. So you do remember some things? Yes, betrayer of hope. So have men named me, just as they named you dragon. But unlike you, I embrace the name. In the other prologue, young Taren asked what kind of a creature a dragon is, no one having an answer for him. And it is interesting that Lews Therin didn't want to claim the name. Elan Morin grimaced. Look at you, he said scornfully. Once you stood first among the servants. Once you wore the ring of Tamerlane and sat in the high seats. Once you summoned the 9 rods of dominion. Here's more world-building details that didn't make sense during my first read. Now I know that this has to reference that he was foremost among the male Aes Sedai, as the foremost female is called the Amerlin seat. The 9 rods of dominion just sounds like a really cool spell that I want described to me. Elan obviously hates Lews Therin for being the stronger of the two on several occasions, and spitefully, he heals him in a torturous way. Lews Therin regains his mind and sees his wife dead, at first blaming Elan for it. 10 years, betrayer, Lews Therin said softly, the soft sound of steel being bared. 10 years your foul master has racked the world, and now this. I will... Elan reminds him that their conflict has not lasted a mere 10 years, but since the beginning of time, which is represented by a wheel of time, repeated over and over, destined to continue, according to Elan, until the Shadow wins. I'm not fully clear on this lore, because Elan says that he and Lews Therin specifically have fought thousands of times, which would mean that it sort of sounds like Elan is the Dark One, but he isn't because he references the Dark One as a separate entity. Does this mean that other people than the dragon are reborn over and over? Or has Elan lived a very long time? I've read this book a few times now, and I'm still not sure. I'm guessing that it will eventually become clearer. I'm hoping, at least. Lews Therin then remembers that the world is being torn apart by the 100 companions who helped him reseal the Dark One, And furthermore, that Taren is the one who killed his family and everyone else in a fit of insanity, leading him to be known as Lu's Kinslayer in the future. Taren's insanity is because when he sealed the Dark One countered by putting a taint on the male half of the source, and unable to live with his actions, both killing his loved ones and inadvertently causing the source to become tainted, he teleports far away from civilization and summons more power than he can handle, drawing lava from the earth, creating the mountain that is now known as Dragonmount. Where he had stood, a mountain now rose miles into the sky, molten lava still gushing from its broken peak. The broad straight river had been pushed into a curve away from the mountain, and there it split to form a long island in its midst. The shadow of the mountain almost reached the island. It lay dark across the land like the ominous hand of prophecy. Nice use of ominous hand of prophecy. And we are going to remember the island in the river. The land promises that though Taren is now dead, it's not over between them. This prologue is followed by 2 excerpts about some history of time, the first of which describes the aftermath of the War of Shadow and the breaking of the world. The second emphasizes that the dragon is foretold to be reborn and save the world, that there are prophecies to be fulfilled around that. And it has a strong religious overtone, like crying out for the creator to do something, which makes it a hint odd that there is very little religiosity in the book at large. The added prologue, Raven, is, in my opinion, the better one, both in like its structure and how it sets up the rest of the story. But I know that all of this information is helpful, and it also serves to make it like obvious that we're waiting for the dragon to be reborn and that it's Rand. You know? Chapter 1, An Empty Road. The first chapter begins by emphasizing how the wheel of time moves through the ages. It is described as a wheel, dividing the ages with its spokes, and it illustrates that the ages are recurring. But every time that one comes around, so much time has passed that no one remembers that it has happened before. And it thus appears to be a new age. I have questions about this, but I think I'll address them at the very end. Born below the ever cloud-capped peaks that gave the mountains their name, the wind blew east out across the sand hills, once the shore of a great ocean before the breaking of the world. Down it flailed into the 2 rivers, into the tangled forest called the Westwood, and beat at 2 men walking with a cart and horse down the box-strewn track called the Quarry Road. It's nice to anchor us in the prologue and the breaking of the world. Also, nice use of flailed. Randall Thor is walking with his father, Tam, from their farm to the village Eamon's Field. They are delivering brandy and cider to the inn in preparation for a yearly celebration called Beltime. We learn that though spring should be here, it is still winter cold. For all that spring should have come a good month since, the wind carried an icy chill as if it would rather bear snow. Gus plastered Randall Thor's cloak to his back, whipped the earth-colored wool around his legs, then streamed it out behind him. Nice use of plastered. Rand is in a worried mood this cold, eerie morning. As a particularly strong blast tugged the cloak out of his hand, he glanced at his father over the back of the shaggy brown mare. He felt a little foolish about wanting to reassure himself that Tam was still there, but it was that kind of day. Spring is very late, following a very rough winter, which as I said, was nicely emphasized by the pre-prologue. Snarls of last year's brambles spread brown webs over the stone outcrops under the trees. Nice use of snarls. The pale sun sat above the trees to the east, but its light was crisply dark, as if mixed with shadow. It's a nice atmospheric description, though I have a difficult time imagining it. Crisply dark feels like it contrasts with mixed with shadow, to me at least. Winter had been bad enough on the farms, worse than even the oldest folk remembered. But it must have been harsher still in the mountains, if the number of wolves driven down into the 2 rivers was any guide. Wolves raided the sheep pens and shooed their way into barns to get the cattle and horses. Bears had been after the sheep too, where a bear had not been seen in years. With his thick chest and broad face, he was a pillar of reality in that morning, like a stone in the middle of a drifting dream. Rand's relationship with his father is central to his character. particularly because he barely remembers his mother, who died when he was very young, and the two of them live alone on their farm. And we note here that Rand looks different from most of his fellows because his mother was originally an outlander, something that is very unusual for the Two Rivers in of itself. Rand is very tall and has reddish hair and grey eyes, while those around him mostly have dark hair and brown eyes. She had been an outlander, and Rand remembered little of her aside from a smiling face, though he did put flowers on her grave every year at Beltane in the spring and at Sunday in the summer. And I just want to make a note of this for later. Let's put a pin in it. Rand begins to feel like someone is watching him, and is then startled to see someone following them in the dark on the lonely trail, a cloaked rider on a dark horse. There was only shadow to see in the hood, but he felt hatred as sharply as if he could see a snarling face, hatred for everything that lived, hatred for him most of all, for him above all things. Very creepy, very atmospheric. Rand then stumbles and he looks up and the rider has vanished. His father notices and offers to look for hoof prints, but Rand dismisses it all as his imagination, because he doesn't really believe that. He notices that the rider's cape didn't move in the wind that is cutting through Rand's clothes, and he doesn't know how to tell his father about something impossible. And I am not too fond of this feature. Spoiler alert, the rider was real, it's a Myrddraal, creature of the Dark One, and they are at points identifiable by the staticness of their clothes. And I think it's a bit clumsy, I guess. It doesn't make sense to me. The powers of the Myrddraal or Fades aren't fully explained in this book, but they aren't apparitions or anything, so why doesn't their cloak move? It bugs me. Will continue to bug me. Anyway, the two continue on their way. Rand continuing to feel afraid because of what he saw, and trying to ignore it. We also learn that Rand and Egwene has a very awkward romance brewing. They're very fond of each other, but young enough that they don't really know how to approach it. They are very cute. Also, Rand's father has taught him a method of controlling his emotion by imagining a flame in a void and picturing feeding his emotions into the flame safely isolated in the void until they are burned away. In particular, this exercise is for using weapons. This is also very strange for the Two Rivers, but Tam is apparently the best archer in town. The land sloped gently down to the east, though not without patches of woods, farms, and hedge-bordered fields, and pastures quilted the land beyond the village, all the way to the waterwood and its tangle of streams and ponds. Nice use of quilted and tangle. Entering the village, they see the preparations made for Beltane, and for the celebration of this night before Beltane called Winternight. Though spring is lagging, people are doing their best to get into a festive mode. We learn that Nynaeve is now the wisdom, and furthermore that some of the men don't like her. She has failed to predict spring correctly, though she is supposed to, and that she is young and has a hot temper. But the men have no say over the wisdom, which is the business of the women's circle. And I did see some videos about the adaptation, and more than one complained about the gendered politics presented, and I am now confused about that particular critique. If the showrunners wanted a show emphasizing a divide between men and women, then this is the perfect source material for that, because it is all over. Not only because how Aes Sedai are women, some with male protectors, or how another faction, the Children of the Light, seems to be all men, or how some villages have both a village council and a women's circle, who are in habitual conflict with one another, but because there are almost constant comments about men stereotyping women or women stereotyping men. And since I don't know what the ultimate point will be, it all feels very unnecessary. A couple of them are funny, sure, but mostly not. I just don't find it interesting. It doesn't really show either side in a very good light, which I guess might be the point in a future book. So far, it just feels unnecessary. Like most Two Rivers folk, Rand had a strong, stubborn streak. Outsiders sometimes said it was the prime trait of people in the Two Rivers, that they could give mules lessons and teach stones. Very nicely descriptive, and story significant. Rand here is resistant to the fact that many of the older women in town are beginning to see that he is approaching marriageable age, and he isn't interested right now. A double handful of geese waddled about, beadily eyeing the ground, but not finding anything worth pecking, and some had tethered a milk cow to crop the sparse growth. Nice use of double handful. I will be stealing that. And the text is full of nice descriptions of the village, building up a really immersive scene without going too deep. Also giving us details about the upcoming festival, making the culture very vivid. They arrive at the Winespring Inn, greeted by the proprietor and village mayor, Bran Alver, Egwene's father. They are joined by the village complainer, naysayer, and self-appointed judge of what's proper, Sen Bui, whose name I've not settled on how to pronounce. He also complains about Nynaeve's lack of ability to predict spring, claiming that all the ill omens mean the approaching end of the world. Then Mat appears to gain Rand's attention. Rand glanced down and had to grin. Mat Carthoon crouched beside the cart so Tam and Bran and Sen could not see him, his wiry body contorted like a stork trying to bend itself double. Very nice. Mat invites Rand to mischief, showing that he might be slightly immature for his age, and mentioned that they are strangers in the Two Rivers. Rand immediately asks whether it's a rider on a dark horse with an unmoving cloak, and Mat confides that he also saw the same man and that he disappeared right after. Mat even speculates that it's the Dark One, and Rand recites the affirmation that he is bound in Shaial Ghul with the Forsaken, bound by the Creator at the moment of creation. Then they discuss whether they should tell someone other than Rand's father, and how to make anyone believe them. Mat has already told a couple of boys, who now believe that he's messing with them. He lapsed into affronted silence. Nice use of lapsed. Rand rubbed the top of his head briskly, wondering what to say. Mat was something of a byword around the village. Few people had escaped his pranks. Now his name came up whenever a wash line dropped the laundry in the dirt, or a loose saddle girth deposited a farmer in the road. Mat did not even have to be anywhere around. His support might be worse than none. It is a really good description of Mat, and how his tendencies affect his role in the village. It is a far cry from the adaptation, which portrays him as less as a troublemaker for fun, and more as an actual degenerate gambler and thief. With a very deeply set heart of gold, of course. Here, Mat proves himself to be a good enough lad to help Rand unload the cart into the inn cellar. They both learn that there's a Gleeman in the village. Gleemen are traveling entertainers and are highly valued in the countryside, and everyone are excited to hear about it because they are far in between. And right here, I will make a very small complaint about the name spellings in this book. Another one, I guess. I do have a very petty pet peeve about fantasy names being spelled differently but pronounced the same as modern names. Such as, why is Matt spelled with only one T? It's Jordan's world, so he could very easily have made Matrim being spelled with two T's. It's a very minor complaint, but it is slightly annoying to me. And I do know that some people, there are real people who like to spell their names differently. Or rather, there are parents who like to spell their children's name differently. And I don't understand it, but I accept that it's a real thing. And I'm not insulting anyone. It's just, why though? I don't get it. Chapter 2. Strangers. Inside the Winespring Inn, Bran finds the other members of the village council waiting for Bran and Tam, Rand's father, to join them. The fireplace stretched half the length of the big square room, with a lintel as high as a man's shoulder, and the crackling blaze on the hearth vanquished the chill outside. Nice use of vanquished. At that time of the busy day before festival, Bran expected to find the common room empty except for Bran and his father and the cat, but 4 more members of the village council, including Sen, sat in the high-backed chairs in front of the fire, mugs in hand and blue-gray pipe smoke wreathing their heads. Nice use of wreathing. As the boys toil, we learn more about Matt's shenanigans, and then another boy arrives to tell him that there are strangers in the village. The year separating Rand and Mat from Ewan, only 14, were usually more than enough for them to give short shrift to anything he had to say. Again, it's endearingly illustrative of their age and inexperience that they assign so much importance to an age difference of a few years. Both Mat and Rand jump to ask whether it's a black-cloaked rider, but it is in fact a very noble-looking woman and her male sword-carrying attendant, the same strangers Mat was about to tell Rand about before he asked about the rider in black. Strangers is a very rare occurrence in the village, and these ones have already made themselves unpopular with Nynaeve. She asked the wisdom for direction this morning, Ewan said, and called her child. Rand and Matt both whistled softly through their teeth, and Ewan tripped over his tongue in his haste to explain. This whole section is a very good introduction to Nynaeve's character. It's always good to establish character traits by people reacting to them. Show, don't tell, and all that. He bounded up the stairs, and Ewan scrambling behind him, calling, "Is there really a Gleeman, Matt? This isn't like the ghost hounds, is it? Or the frogs? I would really like to know about the frogs now." And I like that the characters are so well portrayed, even minor ones like Ewan. The village council is locked in a discussion, so Rand and Matt go outside, spotting a strangely behaving raven staring at them. They exchanged a glance, then as one their hands darted for rocks. It's not too endearing to throw rocks at animals for no reason, but in this instance it's quite cute that they're so synchronized. The bird doesn't fly away though, but instead Moraine arrives, adding her distaste for the animal, and Moraine is not only beautiful but has a presence to match. She was barely tall enough to come up to his chest, but her presence was such that her height seemed the proper one, and he felt ungainly in his tallness. And I guess here is as good a spot as any to begin with the scattered details of this book, which remind me of Lord of the Rings. The most important part of that is to remember that something being reminiscent of another work isn't a critique. It is just an observation. It might be a conscious choice to pay homage to an admired piece of art. Even if it's not, drawing inspiration isn't a bad thing. And it might even be coincidence. When reading, I very often come across details in stories which remind me somewhat of things that I've written. And there's obviously been no plagiarism in either direction. It just happens. I am a firm believer in the saying that there's nothing new under the sun. Everything has been done before in some form. What I'm thinking about here is that in Moraine's description was Rand having a hard time pinning an age to her. And he has a similar reaction to another Aes Sedai later on. Tolkien often used the same thing to describe elves. And I can't be the only one who thinks that the names for evil things in this book really sound Tolkien. Am I? Moraine looked from him to Matt and back again. Rand thought her smile, a bare curve of the corners of her mouth, was now the sort Egwene wore when she had a secret. I think it's enduringly cute how often Rand thinks about Egwene, and how their relationship is apparently maturing as they are growing older. Moraine introduces herself as a history buff, which goes a ways to explain all the questions she's been asking around the village, and she gives each of the boys a silver coin in exchange for doing tasks for her around the village. They are overwhelmed by her wealth and her unusual presence. As the wheel of time turns, Moraine said, half to herself and with a distant look in her eyes, places wear many names. Men wear many names, many faces, different faces, but always the same man. Yet no one knows the great pattern the wheel weaves, or even the pattern of an age. We can only watch and study and hope. Moraine has a bad habit of thinking aloud, and I find it equally annoying every time. She has so many secrets that it feels incongruent that she's so bad at keeping her thoughts to herself. She promises to talk to them later and leaves in a very nice description indicative of how the boys see her. She moved on toward the wagon bridge, appearing to glide over the ground rather than walk, her cloak spreading on either side of her like wings. There's also a description of Lan, her attendant, his black hair beginning to gray, and his unusual blue eyes. We also get our first dose of his very judgmental tendencies. It was as if he was weighing them in his mind, and there was no sign on his face of what the scales told him. The chapter ends with the arrival of the long-awaited Peddler, Hadden Fane, and the not at all ominous ending line of "It was going to be the best Beltane ever." Chapter 3. The Peddler. The Peddler is the same as has always come to the village. From every direction people stream to swell the numbers around the great wagon, its wheels taller than any of the people, with their eyes fastened to the Peddler above them on the wagon seats. Nice use of swell. Fane, always smiling and laughing as if he knew a joke that no one else knew, had driven his wagon and team into Eamon's Field every spring for as long as Rand could remember. Jordan does an excellent job of setting up the regularity of village life, building the expectation that it's all about to change. Whenever people come to the Two Rivers from outside, people cry for news about what's going on in the world, and Fane is always eager to be the center of attention. The demands for him to speak grew louder, but Fane waited, fiddling with small tasks about the driver's seat, for the crowd and the anticipation to reach the size he wanted. The council alone kept silent. They maintained the dignity befitting their position, but increasing clouds of pipe smoke rising above their heads showed the effort of it. Perrin, drawn by the arrival of Fane, finds his two best friends. Perrin has now been a blacksmith for years and has the physique to match. He is bigger than the others, though shorter than Rand. Perrin is a very careful young man, aware of his strength and anxious not to hurt anyone because of it. He is doubtful of Matt's claims that something of particular interest is going on. Perrin eyed him suspiciously, then looked a question at Rand. Nice use of looked. Rand then embarrassed himself by speaking just as Padden Fane is about to speak, and he's very humbled by it. It had only been the year before that Fane had taken notice of them for the first time, acknowledging them as men. Fane did not usually have time for anyone too young to buy a good deal of things off his wagon. Rand hoped he had not been relegated to a child again in the peddler's eyes. It is cute that Rand is also now concerned about being acknowledged as an adult, though he is years behind Egwene in that regard. When Fane begins to speak, he delights in sharing bleak news from around the land. Winter has been particularly harsh everywhere, and spring is late, not only in the Two Rivers, but the most exciting news is that there is a new person claiming to be the Dragon Reborn. He's raising an army and waging war, and Aes Sedai have ridden from Tar Valon, their city, to contain him. Apparently, there have been 2 other false dragons in not too many years, all attempting to fulfill the various prophecies around the return of the dragon, failing. What's different about this one is that he can wield the one power, provoking the Aes Sedai response, and wielding the power for a man means that he will not only go insane, his body will physically rot from it, which is very nice. Rand exchanged looks with Matt and Perrin. Matt's eyes shone with excitement, but Perrin wore a worried frown. Even false dragons can do a lot of harm, whether they can touch the source or not, and it's telling that Matt is immature enough to find it exciting, though it's probably just because it's something different. Sen Bui, for one, proclaims that this is yet another sign that the world is coming to an end with the coming of the dragon, and that the power shouldn't be spoken of, least of all those who wield it. But the crowd is all in a froth, so the village council declares that they will immediately interview Padden Fane in private to learn all that is to be learned about the war and how it will affect them. Rand and his 2 friends linger in front of the inn as the crowd disperses. They muse about what they know about the dragon, and Aes Sedai being very suspicious of the sorceresses. They are rarely represented as trustworthy in the many stories featuring them, and it was Aes Sedai who broke the world when struck by madness. Some of the stories even call them all dark friends. Contrasting to the prediction of gloom, Matt says that he's heard a story saying that the dragon will be reborn in mankind's greatest hour of need, though this seems to be a rare opinion in the Two Rivers. They are all surprised by the arrival of the censorious Nynaeve and Egwene. When Nynaeve grasps the situation, she declares that she must join the interrogation of Padden because it's not something to be trusted to foolish men. And it's interesting that she seems to be as superstitious as Sen Bui about the Dark One and Aes Sedai. She's also violent, which isn't that great, and it's even less great that it seems to be acceptable because she is a woman. Rand is startled when he sees that Egwene has her hair braided, and it did not seem to have involved any pushing off cliffs into rivers in this version of the story. But it means that they're both very close on marrying age, putting another tinge on their romance. However, Egwene says that she might train to become a wisdom, and wisdoms rarely marry, which is also upsetting to Rand for obvious reasons. He's not very good at explaining his feelings without Egwene taking them as provocation. He's absolutely clumsy, but she also seems to be provoking him to say things that she can take objection to. But some things I can totally imagine why she feels hurt about having them disregarded as silly fantasies, such as leaving the two rivers to see the world. She jerked her cloak around her, a wall to shut him off, and stiffly walked a few paces away. He rubbed his head in frustration. How to explain? This was not the first time she had squeezed meanings from his words that he never knew were in them. Their squabble ends with Egwene annoyed that Rand doesn't want her to become a wisdom or leave the village. So Matt and Perrin cut back in, revealing that Moraine gave Perrin a coin as well. He has also seen the Rider in Black. Egwene is quite unfairly dismissive of it, and then they are interrupted by the appearance of our next main character. Chapter 4. The Gleeman. Tom, the Gleeman, is an elderly but spry man, identifiable as a Gleeman by his green cloak decorated with many colored patches. He has white hair and signature long mustaches. He gestured imperiously at Rand and the others with a long-stemmed pipe, ornately carved, that trailed a wisp of smoke. Blue eyes peered out from under bushy white brows, drilling into whatever he looked at. Blue eyes, like Rand's gray, is a rarity in the Two Rivers. The Gleeman, however, is upset by the way he's been treated. He's here on request, and he expects to be treated with the same reverence he receives most places by the virtue of his profession. He slowed for a breath, taking them all in with a glare, but he was off again on the instant. Nice use of on the instant. Most recently, Tom's offended by how Nynaeve just chased him out of the inn. Egwene's face was a study, her goggle-eyed amaze at the Gleeman in the flesh, marred by a desire to defend Nynaeve. It also appears that Tom recognizes Padan Fain, with none too happy feelings about him. His voice was still deep, but the resonance had gone, replaced by scorn. He is, however, distracted by Egwene, wanting her, as the prettiest girl in the village, to assist his performance. He says he claims to always do this, though he never does it again in this book. Though, to be fair, there's not much opportunity for it. Perrin snickered, and Matt, who had been snickering, laughed out loud. Rand blinked in surprise. Egwene was glaring at him, and he had not even smiled. Egwene and Rand are so adorable, and Rand feeling ham-fisted around her is cute as well. This is also the first time that in the story that Rand is compared to an Aielman, this time for his height. Tom eventually introduces himself as Tom Marilyn, once a court bard, and he's obviously an attention hog, and sees it as below him to spread news like a mere peddler. He also makes fun of the boys for claiming to be well-traveled, for having been around the Two Rivers, and for believing that Trollocs and Ogier are mythical creatures. Personally, I don't like the word Trolloc. It feels like a mishmash of troll and orc, and Ogier is too similar to ogre, but those are also very minor complaints. Rand kept his mouth shut, certain they were the butt of a joke now, but Perrin spoke up. Egwene, still with a firm sense of right and wrong, thus tried to tell Tom to leave off, and he does, apologizing for his big mouth. And, people having noticed the Gleeman's cloak, and the attention seeker that he is, he begins to give a small taste of his performance for the next night. He does a counter-narrative about the dragon, saying that he attempted to free the Dark One, telling us that the dragon's role in history is unclear. However, he abruptly stops upon spotting Moraine approaching, obviously wary of her until she leaves. Moraine answered his bow with a gracious nod. For an instant she seemed even more the Lady Ewan had named her, accepting an offering from one of her subjects. Then she turned away, and Lan followed, a wolf heeling a gliding swan. One of many great descriptions of Moraine and Lan together, and Rand observes that Tom is not at all happy that they're there. But the village council is done with their interview of Padan Fain, emerging from the inn as Tom Marilyn goes back inside. Nynaeve has also apparently said that Bran shouldn't let Moraine and Lan stay at the inn for some reason. And then she departs very dramatically. Girl knows how to make an exit. And Senbui does himself no favors, stating that she needs a husband, apparently to teach her respect. Egwene looked at Rand as if she were going to speak, then darted after the wisdom instead. Rand knew there must be some way to stop her from leaving the two rivers, but the only way he could think of was not one he was prepared to take, even if she was willing. And she had as much as said she was not willing at all, which made him feel even worse. Ah. The boys, however, want to know what was said about the false dragon and Aes Sedai. Tam says not to worry, because the war is far away from the two rivers, which is isolated by natural barriers, a wide river, mires, and miles of unbroken forest. But they will institute a town watch to see to their borders anyway. The three boys want to sign up anyway, yes, because of excitement from the irregularity. Tam then declares that he and Rand is going back to the farm, not staying in the village for the Winternight festivities. With a moment alone, the boys decide that they will talk to the mayor about the rider in black the next day, and that Taren and Matt will spend the day trying to find others who have seen him as well, to shore up their unlikely story. On the way home, Rand and Tam talk about the council decisions, and Tam reveals that he told the others about the rider, and he learned in turn that other boys have spoken of seeing him. Rand is relieved, and I was pleasantly surprised. Rand and the others aren't children, but I really dislike stories about children who has the sense that everything would have been solved if they told an adult about their troubles. The chapter ends with another foreboding line. That others knew and believed made all the difference. There was nothing the black-cloaked horsemen could do that the people of Eamon's Field couldn't handle together. Whatever could go wrong? Chapter 5, Winternight. Rand and Tam get back to their farm, seeing no signs of an intruder, and set to the farm chores to be done. Rand grimaced, regretting Winternight in Eamon's Field, but Tam was right. Around a farm the work never really got done. As soon as one thing was finished, two more always needed doing. Nice use of regretting. We get more details about how the lack of spring is harmful. Resources are dwindling, and they can't even shear the sheep because they will be too cold. The text doesn't say, but we already know how important wool and tobacco, is to the whole two rivers. So I'm guessing that their external economy will fall apart if they don't have those to trade when the merchants come. It's also not clear what they buy from the traders, but I'm guessing all the other resources that they don't produce. Seemingly, things are not dire enough yet for anyone other than Sen Bui to cry catastrophe, so instead Van chops wood. Pine for a quick hot flame and oak for long burning. I did not know that. Noted. Grey twilight had come on while he worked, and already it was fading quickly toward night. The full moon stood well above the treetops, shimmering, pale, and bulging, as if about to fall on their heads. The wind had grown colder without his noticing too, and tattered clouds scuttered across the darkling sky. Nice use of bulging and darkling is already on my vocab training list. Check out that video too. After the tasks are done, Rand and Tam go inside to settle down, and Rand is surprised that his father chooses to lock the doors, something not bothered with usually. The front shutters had not yet been closed, and from time to time he peered out, but full night had come, and all he could see were moon shadows. Nice use of moon shadows. Also, to Rand's grand surprise, Tam chooses to bring out a sword Rand has never seen before. Noteworthy, both blade and scabbard carries a mark in the shape of a heron. No gems or gold adorned it, but it seemed grand to him nonetheless. The blade, very slightly curved and sharp on only one edge, bore another heron etched into the steel. Short quillions, worked to look like braids, flanked the hilt. It seemed almost fragile compared with the swords of the merchant guards. Most of those were double-edged and thick enough to chop down a tree. It is very strange for someone in the two rivers to have a sword at all, seeding in this seeds uncertainty about Tam's past, which Rand obviously knows nothing about. Rand doesn't even know how Tam met his Outlander mother either, which doesn't really sit great with me. It is strange that the topic has never come up. Tam says that he regrets owning the sword, hinting again at the dark past with it. However, before Rand can ask any further questions, the door is beating down, and in it appears a monster. It is man-shaped and armored, huge, and with ram's features, and there are more behind it. Tam draws the sword and yells for Rand to run, and Rand escapes through a back window, but he can obviously not abandon his father, so he circles back round. Night had replaced twilight completely. The full moon and drifting clouds made dappled shadows chase one another across the farmyard. Nice use of dappled shadows. The two reunite, hiding in the forest, but Tam is injured and is already growing hot with a fever. He does confirm that they were Trollocs, and share what little he learned of them from others when he was away from the two rivers. The trees cut the worst of the wind, but what gusted through still sliced like a frozen knife. Nice use of sliced. Rand realizes that he has to get his father to Nynaeve in the village, and for that he needs things from the farmhouse, preferably the horse and cart to carry them. He chooses to take the sword and fetch what he needs from the house. The long hilt felt odd in his hand. The weight and heft were strange. He jumped convulsively at a nighthawk's reedy cry, then sagged against a tree, shaking. The danger of the situation is very well built, I think, and Rand's abilities make sense. He can stalk around because he's been hunting all his life, but he is justly shaken by the Trollocs having killed all the sheep for fun, it would seem, and they have gone havoc at the house, leaving nothing intact. But they also appear to have left. However, when searching for the house for useful things, he notices that one Trolloc has remained playing dead, waiting for him. This Trolloc is a bit weird to me, having a wolf features, but also goat hoofs. But okay, I guess. He tries to convince Rand to come with him in broken language because a Myrddraal wants to talk to him, and Rand's fear tells us how dangerous those are said to be. He scuffles with the Trolloc, who more or less impales itself on the sword, and Rand is shaken, but he resets his priorities. But he needed the cart to get Tam to Eamon's field, and for the cart he needed Bella. Necessity made him hope a little. However, he finds the barn empty and the cart smashed. Rand decides to improvise a litter so that he can drag his father through the forest to the village, where he imagines safety and a cure for Tam. Chapter 6, The Westwood, which describes Rand's journey through the wood, dragging Tam on the litter to the village. It's a really intense chapter, consistently building Rand's desperation and exhaustion. Tam has only a slight injury, but is nonetheless delirious in his fever. Rand simultaneously has to deal with the danger of Trollocs being real and to realize his father's lack of invulnerability, which is itself a strong sign of approaching maturity. He had already decided to make his way to the quarry road and follow that to the village. The danger would almost certainly be greater along the road, but Tam would receive no help at all if he got them lost trying to find his way through the woods and the dark. Moonlight filtering through bare branches gave only enough illumination to fool his eyes into thinking they saw what was underfoot. Only when he was sure it was just the wind would he go on. It's good that Rand isn't an NPC guard and can actually distinguish between the wind and other things. Slowly weariness crept into his arms and legs, driven home by a night wind that mocked his cloak and coat. Nice use of mocked. After a while, however, Tam begins to ramble in his fever, seemingly about battles he's been a part of, and just then, Rand sees figures coming along the road toward the farm. Rand never even considered that they might be villagers coming to help. He knew what they were. He could feel it like grit scraping his bones, even before they drew close enough for moonlight to reveal the hooded cloak swathing the horseman, a cloak that hung undisturbed by the wind. As I said, you know a Fade by its cloak, and I still don't like it. But the Trollocs and Fade are going toward the farm, so Rand continues on in the other direction. The Fade behaves remarkably like the Nazgul searching for Frodo in the Shire, though it doesn't sniff the road. The most significant thing to happen, though, is when Tam begins to ramble again. First, about things that we don't have context for yet. They could be historical things, but it would make more sense if they are his experiences. We'll make a note of it. There's a dragon wall, a lawman committing a sin which unleashed some underestimated savages, which the nations had to unite to finally beat back. It involved a place called Carrion and the Shining Walls. It's also about a sapling of a tree called Avendosora, which is the name for the legendary Tree of Life, which was apparently brought to Carrion by, assuming, the aforementioned savages. And 5 centuries later, Laman cut it down for some reason. Rand takes for granted that the Tree of Life is a myth, because everyone knows that only one exists, and that it is with another legend, the Green Man. It's understandable that Rand pays these ramblings little mind, until Tam eventually talks about finding a baby on the edge of the battlefield. Its mother dead in the battle because there were women among the enemy. Addressing his dead wife, Tam says that he took the child for her because she always wanted children, and that they named the boy Rand. Rand only half convinces himself that it's only a fever dream, though this revelation is obviously key for him, as he now begins to struggle to acknowledge that Tam isn't his real father. Chapter 7, Out of the Woods. Very good chapter title, just saying. After dawn has broken, Rand finally reaches Eamon's field, and I kept thinking how hard-hitting it would be if Tam died after all that. But Rand is stunned to see that the village was also attacked, seeing some houses burned to the ground. There are some more great descriptions of it. Soot-coated brick chimneys thrust like dirty fingers from heaps of blackened timbers. Nice use of fingers. Grimy-faced villagers, some yet in their nightclothes, poked through the ashes, here pulling a free cookpot, there simply prodding forlornly at the wreckage with a stick. The destruction seemed scattered at random through the village. 5 houses marched untouched in one row, while in another place a lone survivor stood surrounded by desolation. Nice use of marched. Thick columns of black smoke bent northward with the wind, flecked by careless sparks. Nice use of careless. The first person to acknowledge his staggered approach is Master Lewin, the blacksmith. Trollocs boy, Master Lewin asked in a smoke-hoarse voice. Here too. Here too. Nice use of smoke-hoarse. He shouts for Egwene, passing by, and she leads them to Nynaeve, Rand being in a daze upon realizing that the village isn't safe either. All the stories are real, he muttered. I'm thinking that Cassandra Clare might be a Jordan fan, and no shame in it. I read the first of the, what's it called? The Shadowhunter books last year. Don't think I'll be reading the second. After helping to carry Tam, Lewin leaves before Nynaeve appears. She felt Tam's face and thumbed open his eyelids. Nice use of thumbed, though she could have fingered, I think. Nynaeve examines Tam and then mildly says that there's nothing she can do for him. There's an extremely moving scene of Rand unable to accept it, and Nynaeve taking a few moments to console him, trying to make him feel better about failing to help his father, before she has to go back to tending those that she can help. I brought him to you as quickly as I could, he mumbled. Even with the village in ruins, there had been the wisdom for hope. With that gone, he was empty. Egwene has to go as well, leaving Rand alone and unable to accept it, and lost for what to do. So he turns to the next person he is young enough to believe can help in any situation. On the way to the inn, he sees more of the destruction and Trolloc corpses being hauled to be burned, adding to the unreality. Arriving, he sees Tom Merlin outside, who observes that Padan Fain seems to have disappeared, probably taken to be eaten by Trollocs. He tries to reassure Rand that the wisdom will help, but Rand only wants to see the mayor, of course. We also see that Tom is a good guy as opposed to his previous taunting. Without asking if Rand needed or wanted help, he hopped down and picked up the back of the litter. Rand also notices that the door of the inn have been marked with the dragon's fang, which apparently is an accusation of evil intent. At the moment, he doesn't really care. Bran is horribly distracted, of course, but he jumps to action when he sees Rand and Tam, sending Tom to fetch the wisdom. And we learn that Bella, the horse, survived. Yay! Only when Tom has gone does Rand say that Nynaeve has already seen them and that she won't help. But they take Tam upstairs anyway. Tom returns, annoyed, saying that Nynaeve won't come. And Rand begs Brand for advice because he's desperate. And Tom leads the conversation onto the dragon's fang on the door. And Bran then remembers that Aes Sedai can heal. And Moraine has revealed herself to be Aes Sedai. Apparently some of the villagers have already demanded that she and Lan be expelled from the inn. Rand had only half listened to the conversation, but this last tugged him to speak. What did they do? Nice use of tugged. And what they did is that Moraine threw around some magic and Lan his sword, saving the village. Rand decides that even though he distrusts Aes Sedai as much as the next person, he is willing to chance everything for his father, and goes to fetch her. Here I can insert appreciation for the very deftly presented fictional kind of horse called Durrans. A simple piece of world building, but still nice. They are like large draft horses, now used to drag Trolloc corpses. Moraine is by the fire where they're burning the bodies, watching Lan checking the identifying badges the Trollocs apparently wear, and he's able to identify which band they belong to. Cobal, he announced. He bounced the badge on his palm and snatched it out of the air with a growl. It's always interesting to picture how a human sounds when they growl. This is how it goes in my mind. Well, actually, no. My mind just skips over things like that. But if I would try to imagine it, it would go like this. Cobal. Grr. It's not more intimidating if I try to replace it with, some humans can make a growling sound. But it's just weird. When it's used to replace said in a dialogue, I'm guessing it's meant figuratively to show aggression. But in this sentence, it's like wholly separate from anything. Lan just growls. This thing also implies that there is Trolloc culture of some kind with different clans and whatnot. Though we don't see any more of that in this book. There is something very unpleasant in the glossary, but I'll save that to the end as well. Moraine and Lan seems very confused about the appearance of Trollocs, as well as how varied they are. Rand is desperate, but he does hesitate when before the two of them. Surely there must be something about an Aes Sedai to mark her for what she was. On the other hand, if outward appearances reflected what was inside, and if the stories were true, then she should look closer to a Trolloc than to a more than handsome woman whose dignity was not dented by sitting in the dirt. I'll tell you right now that I very much appreciate how both Aes Sedai as a whole and Moraine in particular are portrayed. As far as trustworthiness goes, it's a very important distinction. Jordan does a really good job establishing and maintaining unease around the Aes Sedai. If he didn't, it would seem very strange that so many are wary of them. Apparently, some of the villagers have even refused to let her heal them, because most of the stories reflect them as evil manipulators. This also explains why none of the boys interrogate her about her actions, because they're afraid. He asked Moraine to help Tam, and she agrees, possibly for a prize. Mistress Moraine Sedai, both turned to look at him, and he froze under her gaze. Not the calm, smiling gaze he remembered from the green. Her face was tired, but her dark eyes were hawk's eyes. Aes Sedai, breakers of the world. Puppeteers who pulled strings and made thrones and nations dance in designs only the women from Tar Valon knew. Moraine here also asks whether Rand has nightmares and tells him to tell her if he does, because she might be able to help, but this is completely irrelevant to Rand at the moment. Also, the relationship between Aes Sedai and Warder is appropriately mysterious and still undeniable. Without slowing her pace, she reached up to pat the Warder's shoulder. He towered over her protectively, as if he could give her strength just by being close. Chapter 8. A Place of Safety. Moraine and Lan comes to Tam's bedside, dispelling Bran and Tom from the room, Tom obviously still uncomfortable around an Aes Sedai, even though it was his idea, and Lan openly states his distrust of Tom. For a minute Bran hesitated, torn between dislike of being ordered about in his own inn and reluctance to disobey an Aes Sedai. Rand, however, refuses to leave, or rather asks if he can stay. Please, I'll keep out of your way. You won't even know I'm here. He's my father, he added with a fierceness that startled him and widened the mayor's eyes in surprise. So he is obviously angsty about Tam's feverish confessions. Moraine examines Tam without any obvious signs of magic. In the stories, Aes Sedai wonders were always accompanied by flashes and thunderclaps, or other signs to indicate mighty works and great powers. The power, the one power, drawn from the true source that drove the wheel of time. While she works, Lan comments on the heron-marked blade which Rand now wears. Apparently, it's significant, and Lan is surprised to see it on a sheep herder because apparently the heron distinguishes a master swordsman. Rand then thinks to ask whether it would have made a difference if the pair had been told about a horseman with an unmoving cloak. Moraine says no, but Lan is not so quick to absolve Rand of responsibility for the destruction of the village. Lan is a bit of a dick at times, but he does soften up eventually. And he has reasons for his dickishness. For one, he has a habit of addressing people by their profession, and is rarely complimentary, except when it is, and then it's really cute. Moraine puts responsibility on herself for not predicting something like this after seeing the raven behaving oddly. And we learn that carrion feeders, like ravens, crows, and rats, are spies of the Dark One. And there are many of them around this winter. And obviously in the first prologue as well. It seems to surprise Rand a whole lot that the Dark One is active in the world, which both makes sense and not. He does believe that the Dark One can only affect you if you live immorally or say his true name. Moraine then explains that Trolloc weapons are tainted by evil, and she uses something called an angrial, which are tools to allow an individual to wield more power without dying. And she also throws in that Aes Sedai have lost the ability to make these since the Age of Legends. She does offer a lot of information spontaneously. When she heals Tam, Lan reveals that the rider in black was in fact a Myrddraal, otherwise known as Fates, Halfman, Lurk, or Shadow Man. Beloved child had many names. The reason that there should be no Trollocs in the Two Rivers is that they would have to travel a long way from the Blight in the far north. We also learned that Trollocs and Myrddraal are monsters made by the Dark One once upon a time, using humans and other things. Myrddraal have no eyes, and yet they can see, which I hope will be significant at some point. Lan also claims that one for one, Aes Sedai are stronger than Fates, even though they get their power from the Dark One. At the same time saying that for a person without the ability to wield the power, there are few more dangerous things. Lan is startled when Rand mentions that the Trolloc spoke to him at the farm, but is then impressed that Rand managed to kill it. Lan's face softens slightly, if rock could be said to soften. So he can be nice, and he's complimentary about the distinction of having killed the Trolloc, let alone survived one. By then, Moraine has healed him and promises that he will be alright with the rest, because Aes Sedai have lost the power to heal someone completely. Also just thrown out there. She really laments that Aes Sedai are weaker than they were in the Age of Legends. When Rand asks her about repayment, she says that he must leave the Two Rivers together with her. He and Mat and Perrin, because the three of them are marked by the Dark One. Apparently the only two farms targeted was Tam's and the Aibara farm, and in town the houses targeted were Mat's house and the blacksmith where Perrin works. 2 farms were attacked, Lan went on, yours and one other. Because of bell time, everyone who lived at the second farm was already in the village. Many people were saved because the Myrddraal was ignorant of Two Rivers' customs. Festival and Winternight made its task all but impossible, but it did not know that. We will put a pin in this as well for later. The 3 of them were targeted because they were all born within weeks of one another. I still don't really understand how both the Dark One and Moraine knew how to look for young men at all, or how they were narrowed down to the three main ones, but they did, somehow. I'm guessing this will be explained later on, and we don't get any explanation why other boys saw the fade. Moraine claims not to know why the Dark One is after them, only that he won't stop. And so they have to leave the village so that the Trollocs don't attack it again. Rand doesn't want to believe what Moraine is saying, but he can't justify putting the village in danger, so he eventually agrees. And Moraine says that she will take the boys to Tar Valon, the only place with the strength to protect them, because it's full of Aes Sedai. And she promises answers for them there. She also seems mildly surprised that Rand doesn't immediately go for it. Moraine also tells him to leave a note for his father, and that they will leave that same evening. They leave him with Tam as they go to recruit Mat and Perrin. Rand is obviously overwhelmed by being targeted by the Dark One, and Egwene's mother comes to see that he eats something and gets some sleep, and the mayor confirms that Moraine told the truth about which places were attacked. Annoyingly, Rand even seems unsure if Tam has even left the two rivers. So if Tam ever talked about how he met his mother, he was outright lying about it. If they never talked about it, Rand has a remarkable lack of curiosity. I'm not saying that all characters with dead parents need to be permanently angsty about it, but he's like 17, 18 years old, I'm guessing. And that is a lot of years not talking about his Outlander mother, when he is constantly reminded that he doesn't look like everyone else. It's not like immersion breaking or anything, but it could have been handled better, by which I mean that it hasn't been handled at all. It is really convenient that he is only now ready to ask these questions. And when I say convenient, I most often mean plot convenient. He tried to say he would do as she ordered, but the words got tangled in yet another yawn. Nice use of tangled. And though Rand tries to stay awake to talk to his father if he wakes up before they have to leave, he naturally falls asleep after having dragged Tam through the forest all night. Chapter 9. Tellings of the Wheel, in which Rand experiences the first of many dreams that aren't really dreams. In this one, he is first in a completely desolate landscape. He scrambled past boulders twice as tall as he was. Dust coated the stone, as if never a drop of rain had touched it. The formulation of as if never a drop of rain had touched it, I like it a lot, and it feels like something a grammarian or a teacher would think is non-standard and want to correct. But being a bit adventurous with structure is good, I think. And I'm not at all making excuses for myself to do the same thing. The sun was a swollen and blood-red ball, more fiery than on the hottest day of summer, and bright enough to sear his eyes, but it stood stark against the leaden cauldron of a sky, where clouds of sharp black and silver roiled and boiled on every horizon. Nice use of swollen and cauldron. Rand knows that he is being pursued by Trollocs, but he hasn't seen them. Steamy mists covered the canyon floor, their thick gray surface rolling in grim waves, rolling and breaking against the cliff beneath him, but more slowly than any ocean wave had ever moved. Patches of fog glowed red for an instant, as if great fires had suddenly flared beneath, then died. It was not the valley itself that sapped his strength and filled the empty spaces left with helplessness. From the center of the furious vapors, a mountain thrust upward, a mountain taller than any he had ever seen in the mountains of mist, a mountain as black as the loss of all hope. That bleak stone spire, a dagger stabbing at the heavens, was the source of his desolation. Very nice. I do like the nightmare world Jordan constructs in these dreams. They're highly detailed, to the point when you don't know how many of the details are actually symbols for something else. In the dream, some unseen force is trying to draw him toward the mountain, but he resists. In the dream, a voice whom he identifies as Shaitan, which is the true name of the Dark One, tells him to serve. He sees the shape of someone in a blood-red cloak with a face too awful to comprehend. He fell, flailing at the air, wanting to scream, finding no breath for screaming, no breath at all. Nice. Desperate to escape, Rand finds himself in a valley by another mountain, and a city on an island in a river, which we remember. I think The first mountain is in Shayol Ghul, where the Dark One is sealed. And the second one is Dragonmount, centuries after Taren died. In the distance reared a single mountain, its peak broken and split, but this mountain brought no fear or despair. It was just a mountain, though oddly out of place there with no other in sight. Nice use of reared. The city fills him with hope of safety, and he goes there even as unseen forces is trying to prevent him. And just as those unseen forces are about to catch him, he finds himself on the bridge to the city. He is amazed by the beauty of the city and wants to explore it, but he notices that the celebrating people everywhere are driving him toward a specific, ubiquitous, tall white tower. When other people are referring to Tarvalin, they do refer to a tower, and I think it's this one. I find it very interesting that the song they're singing, the celebrating people, is called a hymn, and more specifically, a paean. A paean used to have a very specific usage, being a song of praise to the god Apollo, or his mother or sister. And the use is more general now, but it's definitely a song of praise to a divinity. He still could not understand the words, but a dozen interweaving harmonies shouted joy and salvation. Nice. It is your destiny, a voice whispered in his head, and the whisper was a thread in the paean. The swelling voices buoyed his feet. Your destiny, the voice whispered, insistent now, eager. Nice use of buoyed. It is interesting that the voice, identified as the Dark One, wants him to do this. There is no answer to this in this book either. So Rand eventually climbs the tower, and at its peak he finds a Myrddraal, and then he wakes up. Many hours have passed, and it's almost time to leave. But when he checks on Tam, he does wake up. He tells Tam what happened to the farm and the village, though crucially not what Tam said in his fever, which is understandable, fearing the truth when it's available. Tam is also confused about why Trollocs would be after him, but he does agree that Rand should go with Moraine, though he actually wants to go with him himself, being too weak to do so. He trusts Moraine because apparently Aes Sedai don't lie, although they are very good at not telling the truth when they want to. And the bond between Border and Aes Sedai is always premier, so Lan is not more trustworthy than Moraine. This bond apparently also awards the warders with some ability, which is one of which is sensing the minions of the Dark Ones when they approach. Another is faster healing and greater endurance and less need for nourishment. I apologize for the rain if you hear that. I can't really do anything about it. I'm sorry. Before they get any further, Lan shows back up and growls some more, and then he says that there's trouble and they have to leave right away. Tam tells Rand to take his sword with him. They hug, and then Lan haul Rand from the room. Matt is outside and they go together downstairs, but though they stay in the inn because a scene has formed outside. A mob has gathered to form Moraine and Lan to leave because they brought the Trolloc, being evil Aes Sedai and all. The mayor, along with the blacksmith, stands in their way, more or less saying that they have to go through them to get to Moraine and Lan, and he reminds them that Moraine has been all around the village healing people who need it. And he gives this wonderful line, "If you have no gratitude, have you no shame?" Which is a really good insult, but it doesn't deter the mob. So Moraine, who is out front, makes a scene. She pulls some magic, and then she monologues about the kingdom who used to exist in the Two Rivers, called Manetheren. 2,000 years ago, it was so powerful that the Dark One raised a huge army to wipe it out. They called for help from allies that never came. They were so magnificent that they managed to hold out longer than anyone reasonably should. The brave king died fighting Trollocs, and the queen was so wrought with grief that she summoned too much of the one power, and though she destroyed the hostile army, she also destroyed the magnificent city that used to be there. And for some reason, talking about their totally forgotten ancestors discourages the mob, making them apologize or slink away in shame. It is interesting lore, and it does become relevant. But the whole thing is way too melodramatic for me. The high flown language as she describes it doesn't get to me either. It might be to show how much of a presence Moraine has, at the same time as telling about Taren. And I did learn the word charnel, which means a building or chamber in which bodies or bones are deposited. That was useful. Anyway, when the mob goes, they can sneak to the stables. Chapter 10, Leavetaking. In the stable waits Perrin, tasked to be a lookout. Lan has acquired 3 horses for the 3 boys, who are all kind of disbelieving and trying to be positive, like remarking how strange it is that Rand has a sword and Perrin has a battle axe, until Lan puts a damper on the mood. He is very good at that. His face and voice, cold as death and hard as rough-hewn gravestone, stifled their smiles and their tongues. But the 3 are notably not entirely convinced by Moraine's theory that the Dark One is after them. Rand also learns that his friends did in fact leave notes for their families, and Moraine is surprised that Rand chose to talk to his father. Let's put a pin in this fact as well. As they are about to leave, Egwene shows up and declares that she is coming with them. She completely dismisses Rand when he warns her to stay in the 2 rivers because the Trollocs were after them. She thinks that he just don't think that she should explore the world, which is unfair. I'm feeling that she has become a bit too comfortable being able to put herself in a conversational advantage over Rand. She gave him a tolerant look, and he flushed and stiffened indignantly. Moraine puts an end to the conversation and lets Egwene come along, even though even Lan protests, and she says that it must be because it's part of the pattern. I am skeptical to any storyline depending on destiny, but the pattern is how these people see destiny, both in the collective and of individual people, represented by threads woven into a collective weave. It is not a great argument for Egwene to come with them just because she's there already, but Moraine uses this argument frequently. It sounds like she's saying, I think this should happen because it's destiny, but it's presented as though she might somehow know that it's destiny. It's weird to me because I don't know what the intent is for me to think. Regardless, Egwene is firm in her choice and in her interpretation of events. Lan suggests she can take Tom Merrilyn's horse, but the Gleeman appears, having listened in from the hayloft. He declares that he will go with them to Tarvalon because he wants to perform there, a likely story. But Moraine agrees, again citing the pattern, and it's decided that Egwene will ride Bella, who is in the stables after running from the farm. If Bella is ever killed or stolen, I'm confident that it will be for the feels. But the scene ends with a very cute moment with Rand and Egwene promising to look after each other on the road, showing that even though they squabble, it's underpinned by genuine affection. Also, story significant, Lan tells the group that wolves and Trollocs are natural enemies. Lan is on a mission to keep them all afraid and compliant, which is understandable because it's up to him to keep everyone alive when he actually only cares about Moraine. As they sneak out of the village, they spot an improvised village guard. The others found in 2 ragged ranks behind him, and the patrol marched into the night as if stepping to 3 different drums. I like the try-hard attitude. On the way out of the village, Rand notices a huge flying shape across the moon. Lan growled a word, sounding as if it left a bad taste in his mouth. Drag car. Lan growls a lot, and people are divided on good words to use for dialogue. For some, avoiding the word said is really important on the basis of avoiding repetition, which is why I sort of fall into that camp. I have learned, however, that some people really hate this exclusion of said, because it takes away from the reader's imagination, therefore lowering their immersion and therefore enjoyment. Where do you land? Do you even think about it? I only object when it sticks out, either in style or something nonsensical, like growl. Anyway, a drag car is a flying monster created during the War of Shadow. In the first prologue, Taren does ask what kind of a creature a dragon is, and there's no answer. It is a mythical creature without description. I do realize that that part was probably written after this part, but if the concept of a dragon is such a vacuum, shouldn't it sort of come up when mentioning a drag car? I think so, maybe. Anyway, the drag car is tracking them on behalf of the Myrddraal, complicating their escape as they head north toward the only ferry crossing in the two rivers. Chapter 11. The Road to Taren Ferry. The group races on through the night. Rand is on a quick horse, but he worries about Bella's ability to keep up, afraid that Egwene will be left behind if she falls behind, which is not an unreasonable fear considering what happens later in the story. His deep concern for Egwene is obvious in his decision to stay behind with her if that happens. With all his heart and desperation, he silently shouted at Bella to run like the wind, silently tried to will strength into her. Run! His skin prickled and his bones felt as if they were freezing, ready to split open. The light helped her run, and Bella ran. Very nice description of the experience. They race on until they reach the next village on the way north, Watch Hill. A vagrant gust of wind brought a fragment of song from the village, and smells of cooking that made his mouth water. Nice use of vagrant gust. Moraine declines the suggestion of taking a break, not until they cross the river after the next village. The horses are worn, but Moraine solves the problem using the force to refresh their strength, but strangely, Bella doesn't need it. But the drag car returns. The wind of the drag car's wings beat at Rand with a feel like the touch of slime, like chittering in the dank dimness of a nightmare. Fantastic. Chaos reigned among the party. I had to read this line a few times before I realized why I didn't like it. It's a very nice use of reigned, but it's not accurate since Lan and Moraine isn't bothered at all. The party is in temporary disarray, and Rand's instinct to draw his sword, even though he can't do anything with it, is interesting. And then they rush onwards again. The drag car's shriek challenged the knights. Nice use of challenged. Bella does keep pace, and he credits Moraine with doing something to that effect. He notices that Egwene is inappropriately exhilarated by the whole thing. His mouth dropped open in surprise until a swallowed bite me set him off into a fit of coughing. I was interested in this strange word. Biteme, biteme, biteme? And then Google eventually delivered that it's pronounced bite me, and it's an invention of Jordan's, like for a midge or a mosquito. And I hate it. I hate it so much. It's completely unaesthetic to me. In the Green Rider series, a comparable thing are called biters, which is so much better than bite me. Maybe he has wanted an excuse to be a bit rude. I don't know. They galloped through a tatter of fog, thin and no higher than the horse's knees. Cloud sped through it in 2 strides, and Rand blinked, wondering if he had imagined it. Nice use of tatter of fog. Moraine has summoned it to shield them from the drag car. Slaty mist obscured both sky and ground, so that the riders, themselves turned to shadow, appear to float through night clouds. Nice use of slaty. Rand is uncomfortable about the one power, but they ride on until they reach their goal, Taren Ferry, which is part of the two rivers, but not really. One and all, Taren Ferry folk had a reputation for slyness and trickery. Nice use of one and all. Still in the wee hours, Lan pounds on the ferryman's door and demands he take them over right now, despite the dark and the fog, paying him a large amount of gold to do so, and he's obviously too greedy not to accept. Chapter 12. Across the Taren. The group and Mist move down toward the ferry to wait for the ferryman and his workers. Rand speculates that Egwene must be in a much better mood than the rest of them because she has chosen to go on this adventure. The torches they carried burned away a patch of fog around them. Nice. Lan encourages everyone to posture against the ferryman and his haulers, in case they are considering robbing them for that extra gold rather than taking them across. Lan leaned against his saddle with apparent casualness, but one hand rested ostentatiously on the long hilt of his sword. There was an air about him of a metal spring, compressed, waiting. Lan is continually extremely hardcore throughout. Rand less so. Rand hurriedly copied the warder's pose, at least insofar as putting his hand on his sword. He did not think he could achieve that deadly-seeming slouch. If the ferryman had decided to rob them, he decides against it, taking them across the river instead. The landing disappeared as mist surrounded them, tenuous streamers drifting across the ferry between the flickering torches. Nice use of tenuous streamers. Rivers a man could not wade or swim or even see across were nervous-making to someone who had never seen anything broader or deeper than a waterwood pond. Nice use of nervous-making. Rand still tries to assimilate that the ferryman might have tried to rob him. Such a thing would be unheard of in the shelter of his honest folk village. And he's beginning to understand the threat of dark friends. They reach the other side, and Moraine tricks all of the workers to leave the ferry and then promptly sinks it to prevent the ferryman from telling anyone that he brought them across. An unfortunate occurrence. Moraine's voice was hollow in the fog that made her a shadow as she turned from the river. Spooky. She pays for the destruction with more money, but still that's a man's livelihood, and a grand inconvenience for anyone else who needs to cross in the worst spring ever. She also chooses to send the mist that has been covering them up and down the river to make the Myrddraal think that's where they went. And at the very least, he has to split his forces searching for them. And Moraine gloats about her ability to cast that spell, which is an interesting side of her, since she also proclaims that she won't be explaining her actions to the party, besides the ultimate intent to take them to Tarvalon. Lan takes them to a previously prepared hidden place to rest for a few hours, which he prepared on the way to Eamon's Field. Significantly, Moraine uses this time to prioritize recruiting Egwene to be an Aes Sedai, explaining that the one power is divided into two parts, the male part being tainted on the surface, so it cannot be reached without touching the stain. But the female part is okay to use, which is why there are only female Aes Sedai now. Rand wants to intervene, but he's stopped by Tom, saying that it's hopeless. Moraine obviously believes that Egwene has the potential to be a very strong channeler. We also learn that there are different Aja among the Aes Sedai, and that the Red Aja hunt down any man who can use the power, because they think that the world will break again if any such man is allowed to live. And it's interesting to know that the Aes Sedai are not a pillar. Apparently, Moraine knew right away, upon meeting Egwene, that she could channel, and she proceeds to guide Egwene in a trial so that she won't have any bad side effects from channeling the first time, which is apparently a risk. And Egwene passes this trial to Rand's dismay. But Egwene is unsurprisingly thrilled that she's going to be an Aes Sedai. Chapter 13, Choices. Moraine lays hands on all of them, despite their discomfort, and everyone but Lan falls asleep and wake up totally refreshed an hour later. No sooner did he lean back against the log wall, though, than sleep rolled him under. Nice use of rolled him under. Lan's protectiveness of Moraine is made clear. He not only protects her, but prioritizes her well-being, letting her sleep as long as possible since she can't magic strength for herself, and her strength of will is well established. The Aes Sedai's eyes were shadowed, but she sat her saddle upright and steady. Rand is apprehensive about being this far away from home for the first time, and the other boys both claim that they will be home soon. Egwene is a hint obnoxious about calling them out for, I guess, being wimpy, that they're getting the adventure they always talked about, attributing it to them being men. Unnecessary, but as I said, this happens often. Sure, there have been times in my life when I use the word men as an insult when I'm frustrated about what feels like typically male behavior, but it's in every other chapter over things that don't seem to be gendered behavior, especially as Egwene herself seems to be shaken, and none of the adults reassure them, by the way. The next stop on their journey is a town called Berlin, And Lan dictates the direction and travel manner, and he himself does double work, scouting ahead and behind, covering their trail. With no sign of pursuit, the boys eventually begin to feel like they might have escaped the Trollocs and Myrddraal, though Lan still makes them avoid any sign of civilization. We learn that the land itself is very sparsely populated here as well. Lan even takes the time in the evenings to give the boys some instruction in their weapons, and is surprised when Rand already knows about the flame and the void, though he is, of course, makes sure not to give them any kind of confidence that they would be able to defend themselves. Tom entertains them at night, but the tension does add up, so when Rand sees Egwene choose not to braid her hair, after she was so proud of being allowed to braid it, he blows up at her. Of course, because he's worried about how enthused she is to become Aes Sedai. Like, Egwene and Moraine sits alone every night to talk about it, apparently. And it seems obvious to me that he's just worried about Egwene appearing to change at the same time as he loses all other kinds of safety. And it manifests at anger at the Aes Sedai. Like it's the corrupting force. He calls them all dark friends, invoking the sinking of the Ferry as evidence. Egwene obviously don't take kindly to this, and there's a shouting match until they're interrupted by Lan. Moraine does give him a pass for it, hopefully because she understands that it's misdirection at like everything else going on. It's time to be going, Moraine said. She turned to Aldiv, and Rand shivered as if he had been let out of a trap. He wondered if he had been. However, one night Moraine catches the boys voicing the hope that they have managed to lose the Fade and Trollocs, and Mat suggests that they should go their own way instead of going to Tar Valon to get away from Aes Sedai. Moraine is unhappy, and she's uncompromising in condemning their willingness to give up, which doesn't seem fair in the slightest. She declares they must go with her, and even says the words, "Before I let the Dark One have you, I will destroy you myself," which doesn't sound like a strategic thing to say, but I guess it shows she has unflinching confidence in her way of doing things. It is very interesting to me that Moraine seems to be such a poor manipulator, and she knows how prejudices turn in Eamon's Field. A mob assembled to drive her out, and it doesn't make sense for her to be truthfully saying this. Lan said in a previous chapter that the dead is the domain of the Dark One, so killing them would be tantamount to handing them over to him. Moraine is fully to blame for the boys not trusting her in the slightest, and it's surprising in the same way as her propensity to think aloud. Also, it does not reflect well on Egwene that it does not at all seem to dim her enthusiasm for becoming Aes Sedai. And that is never addressed. Rand starts to become more worried about what Moraine is telling Egwene in private, so one night he decides to listen in on them. And in this conversation, Moraine talks about the 5 elements of power for Aes Sedai, which is fire, water, earth, wind, and spirit. Men are apparently stronger in the use of fire and earth, while women are better at water and wind, and apparently equal in spirit. I don't know. Not mentioned. We do see little evidence of this limitation, however. Like, Moraine uses whichever element according to the situation. Egwene is very eager to increase her power, and she's not discouraged by Moraine advising caution. And Moraine also let it slip that another woman in Eamon's Field have the power to channel, though she doesn't say who, and then orders Egwene to forget about it. It really does come across as an excuse to give exposition to the reader. And apparently, we also learn that apparently the number of Aes Sedai are dwindling, because ever fewer with the power to channel are born. She does emphasize that male channelers aren't evil, they're mentally ill from using the one power. She's open about Aes Sedai not being better or worse than anyone else. Then Moraine's spidey sense seems to tingle, and she looks directly at Rand's hiding place, making him startle. With his eyes on the women, a root snagged his foot, and he barely caught himself from tumbling into dead brush that would have pointed him out with a crackle of snapping branches like fireworks. Nice description, and Rand manages to keep his footing, pretending to sleep when Moraine gets back to camp, and he decides never to do that again. The journey continues until they reach their destination. They had topped a low hill, and below them, a scant mile away through the stark trees and the stretching shadows of evening, lay Berlin. The younglings are all very impressed by this sight, calling Berlin a city, to Tom's overt amusement. Moraine has an absolutely endearing moment when she seems to pretend away that the one alternative to doing what she says that she presented to the boys was or death. Not even cake. No cake involved.
Tea and cake or death. Tea and cake or death.
Come on. She instructs them not to talk about what happened for fear of dark friends. They must also not reveal that she is Aes Sedai, as local sentiment here seems to be against them as well. And indeed, they have made some arrangements before because they know which gate to knock on to be admitted without anyone being told by someone they have bribed before, continuing Moraine's habit of shedding cash in every direction. We also learn that there are white cloaks in the city, a derogatory term for the children of the light, who are vehemently hateful of Aes Sedai. The children don't appear to have more political power or rite of passage than the local government awards them, and the governor of Berlin has apparently limited how many of them are allowed within the city walls at any one time, so they're camping outside the town. The White Cloaks appear to be an authoritarian organization, adding extra threats to the already dangers of not sticking to the light side, and they encourage good folk to report on one another. The guardsman also says that some people think that the latest false dragon is the dragon reborn, swelling to his cause, which doesn't fly with Lan for some reason. Don't be a fool, Lan snapped, and Avon's face folded into a hurt look. Nice use of folded. The light illumine you, Avon, Moraine said. They say this all the time, comparable to God bless you, and it does not roll off the tongue. At least not mine. None of the curses, like when they, or blessings when they invoke the light, roll off the tongue either. I have very few reasons to speak English, so I do often read aloud, and I stumbled over these so many times because it doesn't sound natural to me. That's another me problem, though. We do learn more about the prophecies of the dragon via Tom mentioning something called the Carathan cycle, which lists a number of feats to be accomplished by the dragon reborn. One of them contains the outright contradiction that a city named Tyr which has impenetrable walls, except to the followers of the dragon, but also that the city won't fall until the dragon has something called the sword that cannot be touched, which is kept within its walls. So it makes sense that it has never been fulfilled. And, Tom even says that the sword might not even be a sword, because only the leaders of Tyr knows what it is. Fantastic. Remember that as well. We also learn that different parts of the world have differing attitudes to the use of magic. It's not only the White Cloaks who disapprove, but also the people of Tyr, among however many. The group arrives at a specific inn, the Stag and Lion, entering by the back way. Rand is once again startled by the number of people in the same place, but also that the inn can be so busy when the Winespring Inn is empty more often than not. Well over half the windows were aglow in the deepening twilight. He wondered at this city that could have so many strangers in it. They are first confronted by an unpleasant stable hand, Much, before the innkeeper arrives to welcome them by the fake names Moraine has instructed them to use. Chapter 14. The Stag and Lion, in which we learn how the rest of the world is affected by the strange weather. Berlin is currently overrun by miners from the hills who escaped to civilization as soon as the brutal winter allowed them to. Lan goes to hear the scuttlebutt in the common room, and we hear about how terrible the White Cloaks are, using all of the expected tricks of an inquisition. Moraine notably asks whether someone named Min is still at the inn, as the boys are led away to have their bath in a communal bathroom. Almost as good as the Winespring Inn back home, Taren said loyally, if not exactly with a great attention to truth. Taren's a good boy, isn't he? The bath attendant, seeing their weapons, asks whether there is trouble down country as well, and Matt is about to tell him everything, despite Moraine's instructions. Rand and Tom both fight to forestall him, but he's just that eager to tell a great story. The door banged open to admit Lan, brown cloak slung over one shoulder, along with a gust of cooler air that momentarily thinned the mist. Lan sends the attendant out and lectures Matt on how much danger they are in, and if the white cloak heard of what happened, they would assume that they are all dark friends. It seems to me like Lan needs to vent from time to time about being responsible for the safety of others than Moraine. And here he does emphasize that Moraine is his only priority. After an awkward rest of their bath, Rand sees Moraine speaking with a girl dressed like a boy. The party then has dinner, Rand reflecting on how exposed they are, as they can't trust anyone, and being strangers themselves, no one has reason to trust them in turn. On top, he still distrusts Moraine and Lan. The depth of his distrust means that he has to make an internal excuse for Egwene, who wants to be like Moraine. She can't help what she is and all that. Rand's youth explains for not understanding that he is infantilizing Egwene, and it's still, all of it is still pretty fresh for him. He even tries to apologize to her for their screaming match, but she deliberately avoids talking to him. So rather, he has his previous anger validated. Lan tells them that there was a battle in Gelden, and the false dragon Logain won it. It's unknown whether any Aes Sedai were killed in this battle, but there's been no sign of Trollocs or Fates in Berlin, the Children of the Light being the biggest trouble. Moraine decides that they will spend 2 nights in Berlin before moving on. The youngsters are excited to spend some time in a city, which is still amusing to Tom. Rand chooses to go to sleep rather than listen to Tom perform in the common room, showing how he's starkly no longer excited just to see a Gleeman. And then we get another dream sequence, and this time he is in a dark hallway. The air was still and dank, and somewhere in the distance water dripped with a steady, hollow plonk. As is the case with all these dreams, he can hardly remember anything about reality, only experiencing the now. He now experienced primarily thirst. It was a dripping sound that decided him. With nothing to choose by except his thirst, he started toward that steady plonk, plonk, plonk. I have long been partial to this use of the word decide. He moves down an endless corridor, passing numberless doors until he opens one of them. It leads into a stone chamber. One wall opened in a series of arches onto a grey stone balcony, and beyond that was a sky such as he had never seen. Striated clouds in black and greys, reds and oranges, streamed by as if storm winds drove them, weaving and interweaving endlessly. No one could ever have seen a sky like that. It could not exist. I do really like the unreality of the dream world Rand visits. The room itself is illogical, featuring among other things a fireplace, which we also want to put a pin in for later. Strange oval stones made the fireplace. They just looked like stones, wet slick despite the fire when he looked straight at them. But when he glimpsed them from the corner of his eye, they seemed to be faces instead, the faces of men and women writhing in anguish, screaming silently. Most important of this dream, Rand comes face to face with the Dark One, a handsome man identifiable by his eyes and mouth showing flame when he speaks, like he is himself fire, and it shines through the gaps in his flesh suit, I guess. Rand tries to run away, but now when he tries to leave, he finds himself inexplicably back in the same room. He tries to convince himself that it is a dream, but it makes no difference except locking him in the room. The Dark One offers him something to drink, which Rand at first accepts, but manages to think better of drinking, frustrating the stranger. I draw comparisons to the myth saying that if you eat or drink something in another realm, you're bound to it, but I don't know what Jordan intended with this. It just feels a bit disconnected. When Rand questions why he's there, the stranger reveals that some call him Balsamon, one of the names of Shaitan, and Rand tries to run away again, failing. And Balsamon then starts speaking to Rand as though he will know what he's talking about, saying that Tarvalon is manipulating everything, including Rand's birth, so that they can control him according to plans which will eventuate in Rand's death. Balsamon then gives a list of names, saying that they were previously used by the White Tower, just like Logain is being used now. Logain is the Frost Dragon, if I haven't said so. I now feel that I haven't mentioned his name. It's Logain. The Dark One also says that the Eye of the World won't serve him if the Aes Sedai have told him otherwise. He dares Rand to tell them about this dream to see what they would do, obviously implying that Red Aja would gentle him in response, but that's not explicit. And I am very torn about Shaitan's strategy. He is all thick all the time. One of his epithets is the father of lies, which bugs me because he is no better at manipulation than Moraine. And I find it more difficult to accept from him. Like, the whole notion of dark friends is that they must first be lured from the light, right? He claims to have been doing this song and dance with the Dragon Reborn numberless times, and he still has no skill in recruitment. His assumption that Rand should understand what he's saying points me to thinking that Rand is a lot more clueless than his previous incarnations, which the Dark One should have some reaction to. The one fair enough reason for Balsamon's attitude is that he's too overcome with hatred for his adversary. But that is totally my headcanon, if anything. The only other reasons I can imagine are plot reasons, which is not good. If Balsamon had been smarter here, if he'd been more explicit, then Moraine wouldn't have the reveal of the final line of the book that the dragon is reborn. Like, and it's bad because when you're writing, you want your characters to act in ways that make sense for them, not because the plot needs them to. Anyway, Balsamon proclaims how he caused Lews Therin to go berserk and finally end his life. Apparently, 1 millennium later, he started the Prologue Wars and he turned Arthur Hawkwing against the Aes Sedai, and then made Hawkwing send armies across the ocean to conquer, saying that they have yet to know the harm of the second act. It's obviously for us to remember for later. So, like, his manipulation skill must have been fine back then. But they're not now, for some reason. Balsamon predicts Rand's inability to stand against him, that the Aes Sedai will use him until he dies, and then his soul will belong to Shaitan anyway. Rand keeps insisting that this is just a dream, and Balsamon chooses to showcase his power by using the Force to kill a rat by twisting its spine backward until it dies. And he starts to do the same to Rand until he wakes up. And I'm sorry, I do keep saying the Force instead of source. I think it's the light-dark thing that does it. I'm not really a Star Wars fan. It just never appealed to me. But I have recently learned that I need something else than bad boy sex appeal to spark my interest. Rand has woken up and he rationalizes that it's a dream, and he does remember that Moraine has offered to help him with bad dreams, but Rand would still rather have as little to do with Aes Sedai as possible, obviously. Chapter 15, Strangers and Friends, and this is the final chapter we'll go through tonight. It's night for me. It's quite late, actually. I do it to myself. I'm not complaining. Rand wakes up in the morning feeling generally sore and learns that he has slept late and has been left behind for discovering the city. And he does decide to, after some quick thought, he does decide to strap on the sword before he heads out, even though it's still sort of weird for him. He heads to the kitchen to get some food and finds the innkeeper in an argument with the cook. Serving maids and scullions, potboys and spitboys, hurried about their tasks, elaborately ignoring what's going on in front of them. Nice use of elaborately ignoring. The argument is about the innkeeper having the absolute audacity to relay complaints from the guests to the cook about her cats, prompting her grand umbrage, and she threatens to quit, prompting her boss's immediate surrender and retreat. The cook informs him that Rand's companions have gone out, all save one, a boy who is feeling under the weather, and then goes on to talk about the argument. You mustn't take any mind of what you saw now. Master Fitch is a good enough man, though the best of you aren't any bargains. Like this, and this is, I know I've made this point already, but it's everywhere. It feels like, and it feels weirdly, extremely old-fashioned. And while the women usually come out on top in these little struggles thrown around, it doesn't feel progressive in any way, because it's like there's some intrinsic quality of motherhood that makes women win by default. And it's entirely needless that there's a gendered conflict to begin with. Anyway, story significantly, she also tells Rand that the guests' complaints were about finding dead rats with their backs broken, obviously showing that the dream was more than just a dream. Rand has the instinct to confide in someone, but Tom is busy in the common room performing, and he still doesn't feel safe telling Moraine, and Lan is just as bad. Upstairs, he finds Perrin in bed, who shares that he doesn't want to go out because he had a bad dream and couldn't go back to sleep. Rand asks whether he killed a rat, and Perrin reveals that he had the same dream as Rand, receiving the same unsettling warnings about the Aes Sedai. Perrin declines coming out to explore the city. He needs more rest. Rand, feeling depressed, makes to go into the city, but he turns back when he's overwhelmed by seeing the sheer number of people crowding the streets. And I really like this as a description of his sheltered life. He makes excuses to wait for Tom or Perrin. Dragging his feet in the stable yard, he encounters Min, the girl dressed as a boy. Min has some kind of second sight, seeing symbols when she looks at people, making her know things about them that has not yet come to pass. She could identify Moraine as Aes Sedai by sight, for example. Moraine believes that Min sees part of the pattern, and when she looks at the party together, she saw sparks flying off them, indicating that they all have a significant part to play. Significantly, she sees that Rand and Egwene love each other, but she says she's not for you or you for her, not the way you both want. When I read this the first time, I thought it might indicate that the way they both want is marriage, and that Rand might at some point end up as her warder instead. Rand doesn't want to believe any of it, but he asks anyway, and I'll read you a couple of paragraphs of Min's account, and we'll just put a pin in that full thing as well. What do you see when you look at the rest of us? All sorts of things, Min said, with a grin as if she knew what he really wanted to ask. The war, Master Andra has 7 ruined towers around his head, and a babe in a cradle holding a sword, and she shook her head. Men like him, you understand, always have so many images they crowd one another. The strongest images around the Gleeman are a man, not him, juggling fire, and the white tower, and that doesn't make any sense at all for a man. The strongest thing I see about the big curly-haired fellow are a wolf and a broken crown and trees flowering all around him. And the other one, a red eagle, an eye on a balance scale, a dagger with a ruby, a horn, and a laughing face. There are other things, but you see what I mean. This time, I can't make up or down out of any of it. She waited then, still grinning, until he finally cleared his throat and asked, "What about me?" Her grin stopped just short of outright laughter. The same kind of things as the rest. A sword that isn't a sword. Oh my, where have you heard that recently? A golden crown of laurel leaves. A beggar's staff, you pouring water on sand, a bloody hand and a white-hot iron, 3 women standing over a funeral bier with you on it, black rock wet with blood. She ends by ominously predicting that the 2 of them will meet again, and Rand's discomfort with this whole thing pushes him to go out into the streets alone after all. The most interesting bit about this conversation is that it's functionally irrelevant for the story. Rand never reflects on it, apart from that bit about Egwene, and seemingly doesn't seem to remember the rest at all. He doesn't forget, but he also never recalls what she said. It's weird to me, because it comes across like exposition to the reader alone, which is annoying. He even tells Matt some of it, to no effect. Anyway, Rand then wanders through Berlin, marveling, and runs into none other than Padden Fane, who has not been seen since Winternight, assumed dead. He is in a very rough state, and Rand offers to take him to the inn for a meal, which Padden refuses. Rand tells him the name of the inn, which obviously makes you think something bad is going to happen to that inn. And on top of it, he makes Rand promise not to tell Moraine about him, which is very convenient. Fane runs away and Rand chases after him, the pursuit ending when Rand crashes into Matt of all people. What a coincidence! So the Tra. Matt stopped to look around warily, but the crowd was passing them by with never a glance. Nice use of never a glance. Matt confirms that he had the same nightmare, and Rand is beginning to get a funny feeling, like he's ill. They agree not to tell Moraine about the dreams, and that Tom is probably the right person to ask for advice, so they have to hurry back to the inn to tell Taren to get on board. They also come across a group of 3 Children of the Light. Their long cloaks, pristine white and embroidered on the left breast with a golden sunburst, just cleared the mud and puddles of the street. Nice use of cleared, and we see that their position in society by the reaction of the crowd. Just the same, the 3 did not have to push through the crowd. The bustle parted to either side of the white-cloaked men as if by happenstance, leaving them to walk in a clear space that moved with them. The white cloaks are an example of horrific extremism and purity thinking. They justify everything they do by identifying with the light, and they act on the faulty logic that because they are of the light, anyone acting against them is perforce of the dark. They are extremely arrogant, and so Matt decides to pull a trick on them. He sneakily looses a bunch of barrels from their hold, making them crash out. People jumped out of the way as the barrels rolled down the cart shaft with an empty rumble and jounced into the street, splashing mud and muddy water in every direction. No harm done, but the 3 have their immaculate clothes dirtied. Rand's strange mood is in full effect, however. He could not help laughing. The humor seemed to be wrapped in wool, but it was still funny. Nice description, and of course, the white cloaks are furious to be ridiculed. The young leader of these 3 is called Lord Bornhald, and why not put a pin in that as well? He wore an arrogant, unblinking look, with a light in his eyes as if he knew something important, something no one else knew. Rand knows that he's behaving stupidly, but he isn't worried to face them down, and it seems to lead to a fight, despite one of them spotting the heron on his sword scabbard. However, the town guards show up to interrupt the situation. Rand recovers from his temporary euphoria, and the 2 boys head toward the inn, coming across Tom, and they describe the dream to him. And Tom actually listens seriously to them, which is nice. When they ask about the Eye of the World, he says this, which we shall also keep in mind. A legend, the Gleeman said slowly. Maybe. As big a legend as the Horn of Valere, at least in the Borderlands. Up there, young men go hunting the Eye of the World the way young men from Ilion hunt the Horn. He agrees that they shouldn't tell Moraine, and he is equally invested that they need to get Parent to agree to this, so they hurry back to the inn. He clove through the crowded streets as if they were empty, Rand and Matt half running to follow in his wake. Nice use of clove. When they arrive at the inn, they come across Perrin, who is running out to try to find Matt and Rand, because Nynaeve has arrived to fetch them back. End of chapter 15. And our very, probably needlessly close discussion of the story. I don't know. I'm feeling like, and I obviously have some issues with the story so far, but I'm fully engaged, and the world building is extensive and elaborate and detailed, which is very nice, and he doesn't overload on detail, which is, a balance. There are so many things which are obvious. Oh, this is going to be important later. But also a lot of things which I only noticed when I read it again. And I really like that. Any good book is worth reading twice, at least in my opinion. And that's the mark of a good fantasy book also. that you consistently notice new things that you didn't notice the first time you read. Overall, there was no struggle to read it. Well, it wasn't a struggle to read it the first and second times, but I have, since I took a break working on the channel, a long break when I was just not up for it, I read the book twice, and then I read it a third and fourth time several months later. And I don't know if this book holds up to 4 readings in like less than a year. I don't know. But that's not the average experience. I was really enjoying it the first and second time. And that's closer to the average experience. And anyway, I hope so. That's where we end for tonight. And I hope you enjoyed it. I invite you to give your thoughts in the comment. Is there any part of chapter 1 through 15 which you found particularly good? I would love to hear that as well. And I hope you will join me for the next episode of Micro Appreciation. Have the most fantastic rest of your day. Bye. This little candle here, which you can barely see the motif on, is one of my few concessions to Halloween. It's not a holiday I enjoy very much, but it smells nice. I do have another Halloween ornament, which I will display for the next video. So look forward to that as well. And it's also good that to pressure myself a little bit because it's around Halloween now when I'm filming. So that will tell you how long it took me to edit. Subscribe if you would like more appreciation, and leave a like if you liked it. And I hope I see you next time. Bye.